This could be the latest I've ever put out a best of the previous year list. As I told the folks eager to hear my favorites, I like to be thorough. I try to watch as many films as possible, and not just the ones that were mainstream darlings. I obviously can't watch them all, but I try to watch as many as I can that pique my interest one way or the other. So this year was a major surprise for me. This could be the biggest mix of genres I've ever had on a list. I had a really hard time narrowing it down, but finally, at long last, here is my best and worst of 2017. This list is comprised of films that were released in the US in 2017. Some of them may be from 2016, but they never made their way over here officially until 2017, in case you were wondering. First up, the best list. Number 10, Personal Shopper. If you had told me when the Twilight movies were out that I would love a movie starring Kristen Stewart, I would have laughed. However, I've seen her in a few movies since the Twilight ones, and she's completely won me over. I think Personal Shopper is her best work. Ghost movies hit a certain sweet spot with me. If you can build a believable atmosphere and not have jump scares every 5 minutes, I'm usually sold. Personal Shopper is a very, personal film about a girl trying to get in contact with her dead brother. The two were clairvoyant and made a pact that if one died before the other one, the dead one would try to contact the living one. Maureen's living a very isolated life in Paris as a personal shopper, hence the name, and is spending time at her brother's house to try to contact him. For a lot of people, they may not like this film. It's slow, there isn't very much dialogue, and it relies on atmosphere rather than jump scares. Besides all that, it isn't just a ghost movie. It's about sorrow, loss, and the hard decision of when it's time to move on after a loved one's passing. Stewart gives an amazing performance as the grieving sister whose life's on hold. During this time, she starts to get these unusual text messages that may or may not be her brother trying to contact her. The whole thing works incredibly well, and it's a movie I was thinking about long after it was over. Number 9, Logan. What a ride the Wolverine trilogy's been. The first movie, X-Men Origins Wolverine, is, in my humble opinion, one of the worst superhero movies out there. There's various reasons as to why it turned out the way it did, but I'll just shorten it by saying, once again, impatient producers ruin what could have been great. Anyway, The Wolverine was a step in the right direction, and then Logan comes along and is one of the best superhero movies out there. Hugh Jackman nails it. Between him and Patrick Stewart, they give two of the best performances ever in this kind of movie. It really plays out like a drama, with the occasional action scene. While I'm sad this will most likely be the last time Jackman plays the character, at least he went out on a high note. Number 8, Brawl in Cell Block 99. I did not see this coming. I'm not really a fan of Vince Vaughn, as I find most of his performances smug. I don't know, something about him always bugged me, and this goes all the way back to Swingers. However, something about that changed recently. I saw him in Hacksaw Ridge, and I really liked his character, and then I saw this, which blew me away. This movie is not at all what you think it is, or at least what I thought it would be. I was expecting a prison fight club movie, but I got something else, something much better. Vaughn plays an ex-boxer who gets sent to prison to kill a specific inmate, or a drug lord who'll kill his pregnant wife. It's from S. Craig Zahler, the writer-director of Bone Tomahawk, and this somehow manages to be even more violent. Bone Tomahawk was in my top 10 of 2016, and this one was even better. Number 7, The Void. What an awesome film. A mix of Lovecraftian horror and an homage to John Carpenter. A cop brings an injured patient to a partially closed hospital, which is then surrounded by a team of oddly dressed murder-happy cultists. The hospital's then transformed into something out of a nightmare. I kept hearing about how good it was when it hit the festival circuit, but I was still overwhelmed by it. From the cosmic horror angles to the soundtrack, this one shares a similar vibe to In the Mouth of Madness. I said this way back in my review that it feels like a lost Carpenter film. Number 6, Wonder Woman. DC's leading lady finally gets her own movie. While I enjoyed her appearance in Batman vs. Superman, in the solo film they had way more time to flesh out her character. While they did take some liberties with her origin, it was no worse than other films of its kind. They made some changes, and overall, unless you're a hardcore comic fan, you won't know the difference. Gal Gadot was wonderful and did a terrific job of playing the naive Diana, becoming the hero she was meant to be. The No Man's Land segment was outstanding. On top of this, her theme was one of the best and most memorable scores of the past few years. It's not on the level of John Williams' Superman, but it's still an energetic track that gets you excited for what's coming. Just hearing it in my head makes me want to watch the movie again. Number 5, Wind River. This movie completely flew in under my radar. I found out it had a wide release in about 2,000 theaters, but I never even heard of it until it was on video on demand. Jeremy Renner plays a veteran tracker who helps an FBI agent investigate the murder of a Native American girl on the Wind River Indian Reservation. This is one of the fastest movies I've seen this year, and I don't mean action-wise. Just that once it gets going, the intensity doesn't let up. This was written and directed by Taylor Sheridan, who wrote another movie that was in my top 10 of 2016, Hell or High Water. Wow, does this guy know how to make engaging crime dramas? Wind River is a gripping, expertly done film. The story, action, and drama are all balanced perfectly. There isn't a single frame in this that doesn't work. Number 4, I, Tonya. Another film that surprised me well beyond anything that I was expecting. I saw this was getting all kinds of awards and even had people telling me how good it was, but my feeling was, really? I remember the media circus in 1994 surrounding Harding and didn't think it would have made for an interesting film. I was wrong. While I don't know how much of the film was fact and how much was fiction, what I do know is that whatever mixture it made for a compelling movie that deserved all the attention it got. Margot Robbie is better than I ever expected her to be in the lead. She plays a sympathetic but tough character that you feel bad for as you see what she's going through. Allison Janney is hateable as the abusive mother, and Sebastian Stan is almost unrecognizable as the also abusive Jeff. Number 3, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. I had the luxury of going into this knowing very little about it. All I knew is that it was based on a true story, and Sam Rockwell played a racist cop. This is another film that deserves every bit of praise. While I was catching up on my 2017 movies, I had this and a few others I was going to marathon one day. I watched this first, and it wrecked me. It was so good I didn't even bother to watch the other films that day because I knew nothing else would compare. The 3 leads, Frances McDormand, Woody Harrelson, and Sam Rockwell, each deliver Oscar-caliber performances. I knew within the first 5 minutes when they showed me what was on the billboards that I was in for something special. I also liked that there were shades of gray in the film. McDormand wasn't all good and the other characters weren't all evil. It's almost like they made them real people instead of perfect shades of good or bad. Everyone goes through some changes over the course of the film, and at times I was having some mixed feelings about how some of the parts played out. I love this because, again, it's the kind of film that stays with you. A movie may be good, but often you won't think about it much after you've seen it, aside from the occasional, hey, I like that. This one stuck with me. Number 2, Briggs Bear. This year had been full of surprises, but this was the biggest. Again, I knew nothing about the film other than the cover, and that more than a few people told me I needed to see it. Looking at the cover, I figured it was going to be a comedy. Well, I was partially right. It's a drama with some darkly comedic elements. It's about a guy in his 20s living with his parents and obsessed with a TV show called Briggs Bear. However, not everything is it seems, which you find out pretty quickly. This movie knocked me out. I'm not telling any more than the setup because, like the main character James, you need to experience this for yourself. Lots of talented actors were here. Mark Hamill, Greg Kinnear, Matt Walsh, and Claire Danes. It's one of the most emotional and heartfelt journeys I've seen in a long time. Totally genuine while also being occasionally silly, a balancing act they pulled off expertly in a film with some serious subject matter. And my number 1 film of 2017, Your Name. A stunningly beautiful animated film about 2 teenage strangers whose souls are inexplicably linked. At first the movie starts off a lot like other body swap films. 2 kids living in Japan that take over each other's lives when they sleep. At first I thought this was funny, a sort of anime Freaky Friday, but as it progresses, it becomes so much more than that. The 2 start to communicate back and forth via text messages on their phone, and set up rules so they don't mess up each other's lives. That's the basics, but it evolves into a heart-wrenching tale that pulled me in and did not let go. The animation is gorgeous, the story is engrossing, and the whole thing is unexpected. I was floored by how good this was. So that's my top 10, and for the record, number 11 is Split. I loved it, but showing how strong of a year 2017 was, it got inched out. Honorable mentions: The Disaster Artist was a big surprise. The Room is hilarious on its own, and I wasn't sure how a making of one of the best-worst movies would play out. It's like adding comedy on top of comedy. It doesn't always work. However, the absurdity of what went on in Tommy Wiseau's epic disaster was all documented in Greg Sestero's book of the same name. They did a great job of transferring that to the big screen. Some liberties were taken with it, but it didn't detract from the film overall. Atomic Blonde. While it was tagged as a female John Wick, Atomic Blonde was something else. It was a one-woman wrecking crew set to the backdrop of the Cold War. With an amazing soundtrack and some outrageous action sequences, Atomic Blonde was a treat. Super Dark Times was a weird film about a group of friends who accidentally do something horrible, and the lengths that one of them goes through to keep it a secret. Boys in the Trees, an emotional film about two ex-friends reuniting on Halloween. Cold Hell was a really vicious revenge film from Germany. Tragedy Girls was fun, a unique spin on the slasher genre with two social media-obsessed horror fans murdering people to boost their status. The Blackcoat's Daughter was not at all what I was expecting. Definitely requires a second watch to sift through it all. With Gerald's Game, aside from the oddball extended ending, which to be fair was also in the book, the movie's terrific. It was a movie that I did not expect to be anywhere near this good. While Tim Curry is still a superior Pennywise, the kids in this version were the ones who stole the show. Better Watch Out is another Christmas horror classic. Dunkirk I probably would have enjoyed way more seeing it on the big screen, but still enjoyed it on my home theater. I just wasn't blown away. Raw is really messed up. Not much more to say than that. Happy Death Day is a movie I never expected to like as much as I did. Sure, it's the horror version of Groundhog Day, but it takes that formula and has an absolute blast with it. The Babysitter largely succeeds because of the two leads, Judah Lewis and Samara Weaving. The two play off each other so well. Mix that with the script that lampoons many slasher cliches for one of the best horror comedies of the year. John Wick 2 wasn't as good as the original, but still was an awesome action flick. It seems this year I have two 400-pound gorillas. The first being a little film called Blade Runner 2049. Blade Runner is one of my all-time favorite films. I've been watching the various versions and dissecting it for years, so when they announced the sequel, I was pretty much against it. A while back when the late sequel trend started, I was excited because it was follow-ups to movies I liked that never got a timely sequel. Then, unfortunately, they started coming out and were shown to be nothing more than lazy, half-baked soft reboots that were marketed as sequels. So going into Blade Runner 2049, I was already skeptical. However, I tried to give every movie a fair shot to win me over, and this just didn't. I will give them credit for the look and feel, though. They absolutely killed it with the design and soundtrack. It did have the same aesthetic as the original, and wasn't just a glossy, expensive follow-up. A lot of love went into this to expand the universe, as well as tell a continuation of the story started in the original. The problem was, it all rang hollow for me. I didn't mind the slow pace. I mean, Blade Runner was slow to begin with, so I would have been more angry if they made this into an action film. It's just that it all felt like a beautiful sports car with the most incredible paint job and a completely empty interior. Everything looked amazing at first glance, but once I got into it, I found there wasn't much going on. Now, this is a film I do plan to revisit down the road, and I have a feeling I may soften to it in time, but as of right now, I just didn't care for it. The other is a big one. The Last Jedi. Originally, I had this whole big thing I was going to say, but I decided to leave it short. I didn't like it. If you like it, that's fine, but to me, it felt like it was a cynical undoing of everything established in the original trilogy. With Rian Johnson at the helm, I've kind of lost interest in this trilogy. It seemed they were more interested in making this Star Wars for newer fans and just ushering the original fans out the door. Well, with that out of the way, what are the worst films of 2017? The Dark Tower was god-awful. It somehow managed to feel rushed and slow at the same time. There were points where it felt like they were in a hurry to get to the next part, only to get there and have nothing happen. I haven't read the novels, but from what I've heard, most said that they were nothing like this. Collide was laughably dumb. Bad CG car chases, awful dialogue, and two leads I didn't care about. I wasn't surprised to see Ben Kingsley in a movie this awful. I mean, the guy did Blood Rain for crying out loud. But how'd they get Anthony Hopkins? Did he lose a bet? This movie was trying to be a sort of Fast and the Furious knockoff, but ended up being more dull and dim-witted. Alien Covenant was shocking. As someone who enjoyed Prometheus, except for the stupid hands-up bit, I was stunned at how awful Alien Covenant was. From the moronic crew to the extreme changes they made to the Xenomorph's history, this felt more like Alien fanfiction than an Alien movie from Ridley Scott. I probably would have had less of an issue with it if it wasn't tying directly into the Alien franchise. If this was a spin-off of David creating a new breed of Xeno, that would have made more sense, but them linking this as a prequel and making him the creator just felt like a kick in the groin to the fans. On top of the fact that it's moronic and the timelines don't add up. It still wouldn't fix the stunning stupidity from the humans. Oh, let's go to this planet without spacesuits. Oh, let's ignore the warnings from the spaceship. Oh, let's trust the synthetic we don't know that's standing right next to the shredded corpse of a crewmate. Rings was an attempt to reboot the Rings series and make it a much bigger deal by loosely retelling the story from the original remake, but with a higher kill count and a lower IQ. Both Ringo and The Ring stand on their own by being slower, atmospheric horror films that build up tension leading to the payoff. Yes, they had jump scares, but they were few and far between, and more often than not, they were earned jump scares. In this, jump scares abound to the point of where they destroy any tension they might have thought about building. And the worst film of the year? Leatherface. Part of me feels bad because I learned after the fact how much the directors were screwed over with this film. They wanted to make a true, scary Texas Chainsaw prequel, but the studio shoehorned it into Texas Chainsaw 90210. I read what their pitch was, and how the movie they ended up with was exactly the movie they didn't want. An absolute shame! Still, the knowledge of this doesn't change the fact that this was the biggest pile of garbage from last year, it just reinforces it. Why do studio executives continue to greenlight certain productions and then force changes that are against what the product is supposed to be? They had a good cast, and even though the kids in the film ended up feeling more like they were in a parody, they were trying. The changes that were made felt like something right out of the boardroom. Leatherface in the other movies is a hulking monstrosity. Let's make young Leatherface look like he's from One Direction. That way no one will suspect it's him. This movie should be studied in film school as everything that's wrong with the current state of horror. The only thing they got right was making it R-rated. I know a lot of you didn't like Texas Chainsaw 3D, but if you thought that was bad, this one makes it look like an Oscar contender by comparison. Some other movies I didn't like was The Mummy, Mother, and American Mummy. Wasn't a good year for mummy movies. There were other bad movies last year for sure, but I never watched them, so I can't say for certain, and I won't put them on the list simply because I think they're going to be awful. So there we go, my personal best and worst of last year. If you haven't seen any of the films on my best list, I highly recommend you check them out, and of course avoid the worst, unless you enjoy being miserable. As always, these are just my likes and dislikes. If there's ones you disagree with, I have no problem with that. You're free to like and dislike whatever you want. I'm just presenting my picks. I know a bunch of people loved Alien Covenant, but I couldn't stand it. If you're one of them, I'm glad you're able to get some sort of enjoyment out of it. Me? I'd rather forget it ever happened and just attribute it to Ridley Scott having a $200 million fever dream. Have a great week, everyone. I'll see you soon.